Hey everybody, welcome back to my shop. My name is Rob. Today I'm going to build this Alder side cabinet. We've got some storage up top with a couple adjustable shelves, drawer on the bottom. Had a lot of fun building this one. If you'd like to see how I did it, stick around. We'll get into it. Alright, so we're going to begin by picking out our boards. And for this project I'm using Alder. And I really like Alder because it is got a very similar look to pine, but it is a hardwood and it works a lot better than pine. It machines and stuff a lot better, and then I think it's a little more stable than pine, and so I've always enjoyed using it. And so we began by cutting these boards down and then over to the joiner to mill a flat face on the board, and then over to the bandsaw to resaw those boards in half. We're going to be making some book match panels out of this piece. So when I do that, I take the inside face of those and I plane those as little as possible, just enough to remove the saw marks, and then the rest of the planing that happens to take those down to the final thickness that I want happens on the outsides of the board. And that way you get a much closer book match when you glue those together. Now we've got a little plywood that we're cutting into strips. We're going to make some web frames to attach our two side panels together with. I like to use a stop block whenever I'm cutting pieces like that. It helps to ensure you get a much squarer web frame when you assemble those. Then over at the table saw, we're running a groove down the edge of each of those longer ones for the web frame. We're going to use a tongue and groove joint to assemble these frames. So I run one edge and flip it around and run the other edge to give me a 1/4 inch groove. Now we're back over to the planer to plane some more of our stock. These pieces will become the stiles and rails of our end panels. Now back over to the joiner to give us a nice square straight edge. I'm going to rip these stiles with the table saw. I'm going to go ahead and make that rip, and then I'll go back over to the joiner and rejoint that edge. Give me a nice straight edge again to rip the next stile. And there we are, ripping that second stile out of that piece. With the dado stack in the table saw, I've got that set to a 1/4 inch width. And I'm going to run a groove down the edge of these boards. As you can see here, I'm running that groove off center. That's going to complicate my life just a little bit, but that will accommodate some trim work that we'll do later on. Then I trim those up with the miter saw to get a nice square edge, and then with that stop block in place, I'll cut them to length. And then we're cutting out for an arch that will be at the top and the bottom of these panels. Just rough cut that on the bandsaw, and then I take that over to the router table with my flush trim bit to smooth that up and give me a consistent cut. I use a template to do that. Now, because we moved part of that groove for our panel, we go back with our slot cutter bit to recut that groove in the arch. So now we'll go ahead and we'll trim these down to their final length. I left them a little long just to do the cutting and the milling that I needed to do. And then we're going to go ahead and use that dado stack to cut our tongues to fit into those grooves. And I'm doing the narrow side now. And then I went ahead and raised my dado stack just a little bit to do the thicker side. And now I've got some more of that plywood to build another frame. And we're just going to run these tongues on these while we have the dado stack in. And then we'll go ahead and assemble this frame. A little glue in the slots and on the tenon. And some clamps to hold that together. Hey guys, so I've dry fit our side panels together. They're laying down on the edge. Our stiles are still long. I haven't cut those to length. But I found an issue with our rails. On both sides, they're about an inch wider than what I wanted them to be. The reason for that is we want our arch to line up with the panels that will be on the front of the case. And so I took some measurements and figured out that they'd be about an inch off on both the top and the bottom. So we'll go ahead and take this apart and correct that. We'll cut all of our rails down by about an inch and we'll be good to go on that. So here I am, go ahead and ripping those down, taking that inch off. Now we're back to cutting the arches on the panels. And I've got a template to draw that out and went ahead and cut that on the bandsaw, and then we'll go ahead and flush that up with the template. So here I'm running a rabbet on the back side of those panels. This will allow us to cut it down to 1/4 of an inch along the edges to fit into our grooves of our stiles and rails. And then of course I'll go ahead and pre-finish those panels before we assemble. And also before we assemble those panels, I wanted to run some dados on the stiles so that we could fit the shelf in there. And now we will go ahead and assemble that with a little glue and some clamps. And I'll go ahead and measure that as well, just to make sure that we're square and that our dimensions are what we're supposed to be. And so here we are, we're starting to work on the fixed shelf, cutting that to its final size. Cross cut that on the panel sled. And then I'm cutting just a little notch. We're going to narrow most of the shelf and we're going to leave a little notch on each end that will be attached to the stiles. And so I'll take a little saw and just cut out the little notch that you can't get with the table saw. Then we're going to run the groove. Going to do a tongue and groove for the back piece of the shelf. And this will allow this shelf to expand and contract with changes with humidity. Now I'll go ahead and trim those stiles of the panels to length and cut that panel to its final size. Now we're going to go ahead and run a rabbet on the top and the bottom of these panels. And these will be for the frames to attach the two sides together. Whenever I run rabbets and dados like that, I'm always concerned with the amount of material that's left on the panel. In this case I wanted 1/2 inch. And here we are running the rabbet along the back edge of the panel to receive the plywood of the back. And this is a rabbet along the back portion of the fixed shelf, and that will receive the back panel on the inside of the cabinet, and I'll show you that a little bit later. And so here we are, we'll just assemble those panels in the two sides and create our carcass. And here we are gluing the fixed mid shelf, and that's the back part of the shelf. Glue and brads to hold that. And this is the front of the shelf, and we'll fit that tongue and groove joint together and then brad, nail, and glue just the front part of that shelf, and that will allow that to expand and contract. And I've added those small frames that will hold the drawer slides later on, and then we'll go ahead and glue in the bottom frame that will connect the two sides as well. And here we have our assembled carcass. So I'll go ahead and resaw some more boards, and this will be for the back panel for the inside of the cabinet that I was talking about. That way when you open the doors you'll have a nice Alder back inside the cabinet to look at. We'll plane those down, and I planed those down to 3/8 of an inch. Went ahead and joint the edges to give us a nice square edge. On one side of each board I ran a groove just slightly over 1/8 of an inch And then on the other side of the board I run the tongue. And we'll attach those boards together using those tongue and grooves. And a quick trim to trim them to length. And here I'm putting just little dabs of glue along that groove. I don't need to glue the whole groove there, I just want these boards to kind of stay together. So just a few dabs of glue to help hold those joints together. And then a couple of clamps just to let those sit for a bit. And a test fit inside the cabinet. And that fits good. So now I'm making the parts for our adjustable shelves. I've got a 1/4 inch dado stack in the saw again, and we're going to cut these grooves. I made this jig to be able to evenly space those, kind of the same thing as a box joint type of situation. And I like to run those several times through like that just to make sure they fit over the pin good. And then some adjustments to the jig as well as the table saw blade. I cut that, or tilted that to 45 degrees. And then we'll go ahead and cut each of these notches. And I've got that piece of the jig that I stick on there that helps us cut those evenly. And now we've got the notches for our adjustable shelves. And then I wanted these pieces to be a little bit structural, so I'm making a frame out of those that will be on the inside of the cabinet. And these mortises will just be to assemble that frame. You'll see how we do that here in a little bit. These are the other pieces of that frame that I'm making the tenons for. I just do that on the table saw. And now a little glue on the tongue and in the mortise, and we'll assemble those. Put those in the clamps and let those dry. And now I'm making the other part of our adjustable shelf system. And these will be the brackets that hold the shelves. They'll slip into those notches, and you can see I'm cutting those notches on the end there will correspond to the notches we cut to the other frame. And then this piece that I'm nailing on will actually hold the shelf. And they fit in the notches just like that. So here I'm just permanently attaching that frame to the inside of the cabinet with a little bit of glue. I didn't glue the whole thing, but just in some spots, and then a few brads to help hold that. And now we've got our parts that we've already milled with the planer and joiner, and we're going to assemble a face frame. And I like to use pocket holes on my face frames. They work really well for attaching those and putting those together. And then they're never seen because they're inside the cabinet. Just some glue and then screw those together. And I'll go ahead and check the fit on our case. And that looks good. So here I'm just marking for some biscuits. I use biscuits on my face frames. They help line things up. And with a little biscuits and glue, and I can avoid using any brad nails or anything like that. I like to limit that as much as I can. And here I am cutting those biscuit slots with the biscuit joiner. And I was able to cut those biscuits down the side of the face frame and along the side of the case without any adjustment to the biscuit joiner. But on that shelf I did need to adjust that because the biscuits in the shelf are to the lower part, and I needed to line that up with the upper part of the rail on the face frame because that rail sits just about a 1/4 inch lower than the shelf, and that'll give us a place for the doors to stop against later on. So there was a little bit of an adjustment that needed to be made there. And now glue in all the biscuit slots and around all the pieces of the case, and we'll attach that face frame. and clamp it in place. A little tape to help hold the rail down where I can't get the clamps on. And then of course, lots and lots of clamps to hold everything tight. So I've gone ahead and removed all the clamps, and now I'm just flush trimming those sides. I do overlap those just a little bit so that I can flush trim them and make them smooth. What you saw there was the profile of the foot that I'm going to make for this cabinet. And here at the table saw, I'm going to cut that cove. And if you haven't seen this technique before, it's really quite handy for cutting coves. I start with the blade really low, and I'll raise it about 1/8 of an inch at a time. And you can kind of move your fence back and forth until you get that cove to follow your line. Now with the blade set at an angle, I'm cutting a small bevel along the bottom. That'll become the bottom of the foot. And then this bevel is at the top, and that'll just save me some time at the sander that you'll see here. And here I'm just using the sander with some 80 grit paper to smooth that profile and to round over those sharp edges. A little bit of work in the cove to remove the saw marks with the card scraper. And then some hand sanding. Now I'm cutting some miters on each end of the board. And this will be to create the corner feet on the front of the case. I'm going to cut one on each end of the board, and then over to the chop saw to cut those to length. And then I'm using a piece of the foot that's left over to mark a profile on the back of the piece. And this is just to give me a line to take over to the bandsaw and the sander, and I will cut that profile on the edge of those feet as well. And I was able to cut this little bevel on the bottom of the foot with the jig at the table saw. And then here I am cutting that arch at the bandsaw. Round over that top just a little bit as well. And then over to the belt sander and the spindle sanders to smooth those up. And then this is the web frame that will attach the base to. And I'm going to wrap that here with a little bit of alder. Some of that will be visible. And we'll attach the feet to that as well. That I'll show you here in just a little bit. I'm cutting a notch out of the back of the feet so that we can attach those to that frame. And that frame will fit right in that notch there. And then I went ahead and glued up those mitered corners on the front. Let those dry. And now just final trimming that frame to the final dimensions. I oftentimes like to cut these just a little bit over so I can cut those just exactly what I want. And then those pieces of alder that will become part of the base, I'm just cutting those to fit that frame. These corners didn't need to be mitered. They're going to be hidden under the feet, but I figured I'd do it that way anyway just because I'm glutton for punishment, I guess. And here I've dry fit the base together. Now I'm making some notches just to know where those feet are going to hit that frame. And I'm using this thin piece of wood just to create an arch. And now I'll cut that out at the bandsaw and smooth it up at the spindle sander. And we'll go ahead and fit these pieces around the base one more time. And then a little glue and some brad nails. We'll assemble it for the final time. Wipe up a little glue squeeze out there as we go. And we're just going to go ahead and test fit these feet on one more time. And I'll go ahead and glue and attach those with brad nails from the inside as well. So here I am putting in some pocket holes on a stretcher piece for the back of the base frame. We're just going to put that in. That'll add support to the back feet as well as along the back edge of the frame. Little glue and screws to hold that together. And then we'll set that on there and position it. A few clamps to keep it from moving around. We'll pre-drill some holes and then we'll screw the base to the carcass. These are some strips that I'm gluing in there that I'll rest the slides for the drawer. I'm going to be using some undermount slides, and that just makes it easy to assemble or to install those slides there. And then here I am making the drawer, and I'm using a piece of MDF here. I actually planed this MDF to 5/8 to set up and test the jig. And then here I am, I'm actually running both sides of the joint with this jig. You can do that when you're doing a half blind dovetail. And I like to run that strip along the front just to reduce tear out, and then I cut the dovetails. And then we'll test fit that together. That's what we're looking for. So back over the table saw, I'm just running a rabbet on the back edge of the sides for the drawers, and then using my router plane just to smooth those up. And that is for the back of the drawer. And some 1/4 inch plywood to cut out the drawer bottoms. And with some glue, we'll go ahead and assemble the drawer. Some clamps to hold it together, and then some brads to... And then I use the slide itself just to mark the location for the pin in the back of the drawer. And then a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill those holes about 3/8 of an inch deep to a 1/2 inch. And then I space those drawer slides a 1/2 inch, or excuse me, an 1/8 inch back from the inside of the face frame, because these will be inset drawers. And we'll set the drawer box on there, test it a few times. And that's what we're looking for. So here we're going to start building the drawer front. And again, we're running that groove off-center just like we did the side panels. And the assembly or the construction of this drawer front is much like the side panels, but we are doing a haunch tenon here. And that little haunch will fill the groove that we cut in the rails. And then I've gone ahead and cut the shoulders, and you'll notice I had to adjust the depth for the second side. Back over the mortise machine to cut some mortises. This mortise machine really makes quick work of making a mortise. And over to the tenoning jig on the table saw to finish those tenons off. You'll see I have to cut the narrow side of the jig, and then we'll adjust the jig and go ahead and cut the other side, as you see me doing here. And another test fit to make sure everything comes together. Now we've gone ahead and drawn out the arcs to be in that front drawer front, and then over to the bandsaw to cut those out. And I'm also cutting the arcs in the door. I've cut out the pieces for the door, and here I've got the rails of the doors attached to my jig. I'm doing both rails at a time. And now using the 1/4 inch slot cutter to cut the slot in that arch, just as we did with the side panels. And then back over the bandsaw just to trim off that little piece of the tenon. And we'll fit those into the case. And the doors are a little large. I like to cut those a little large, and then we'll trim those to fit once we get the door hinges and everything set on. And this is the panel that I've glued up for the panels for the drawer and the door fronts. I'm drawing out the arch for the drawer here, and then the arch for the doors. And you can see I'm doing both doors at the same time. I'll cut that panel after we draw out those arches, and that'll help line the wood grain up with the panel in the drawer. And then back over to the flush trim bit to smooth out those arches. And then back over the table saw to cut out the panels for each door. And I've cut those from each side with the waste being in the middle. And that will line up the grain with the bottom drawer, as you'll see later on. And then using that same slot cutter bit just to cut a rabbet in the back side of those panels. And there they are assembled and test fit back into the case. And again, I've gone ahead and pre-finished the panel for the drawer front and the doors, and then we'll just go ahead and glue those up. A couple of clamps just to hold those till the glue sets. So here I've cut out some stock to start the trim work. I've cut the arch and then over to the drum sander to smooth it up, and over to the router table to cut the profile, and back over to the little bandsaw to cut out the other side of the arch, and we'll smooth that up with the belt sander. And then back over the router table, we're making the straight pieces of the trim. And then this is just a little round over on the back side of it. And there's the arches. So I've spent a little time off camera fitting our trim pieces to our panels, both on the case and on the doors and the drawers. And so I just want to take a minute to kind of show you what I did here. With these curved trim pieces that we have around these panels, it complicates these miters right here just a little bit. They're no longer cut at 45 degrees to get that perfect miter, and so it's a lot of trial and error. It takes some patience, a little tedious to fit those up and to get those just right. And so what I had to do on this curved piece, I ended up cutting the end at 55 degrees, and I cut the straight pieces at 35 degrees. So you still come up to that 90 degrees. Why that is, I'm not sure, but that's what we did there, and it worked out that way on all the different corners. On the panels for the doors in the drawer, where we had a longer arch, that was a little different. I ended up cutting the curved pieces at 49 degrees and the straight pieces at 41 degrees, and that was the same for both the drawer and the doors, except for in the center of the doors. These ones did cut at 45 degrees. It just worked out that that's kind of where they cut, and the miters fit up good. And these ones had not been sanded and final fitted yet, so we got some work to do there. I'll go ahead and show you how I went about cutting those. So on the miter saw, because it only swings to 50 degrees, I wasn't able to just put this in there and cut a 55-degree angle. So what I had to do is swing it back to 35 degrees, and then I just used a block like this. We clamped it up on there, and then I had this piece that I fit the trim piece into, and that holds it out. That gives me something to hold and cut that angle. And I basically just lined up the center line of the trim piece on the jig here, and with that all set up correctly, went ahead and just cut those like that. So with the trim piece, the curved trim piece on the doors and drawers with the wider arc, of course we had to use a different jig, and it had that at 49 degrees, and then I was able to just kind of lay that out on the saw here, and then just slide that up. Go ahead and make the cut that way. And with our straight pieces of trim, we was able to just put those in the miter saw and cut those normally. Now I'm just using the fine bead of glue. I'm trying to keep the glue off the panel, but I will glue those to the stiles and rails of the door. So with a little bit of glue, and then we'll go ahead and just pin nail those with the 23 gauge pin nailer. And we're going to run those pins into the stiles. We're going to keep those out of the panel so that panel can continue to move freely. And I'm just marking out to install the hinges on the inside of the case. And I've made a little jig to drill those holes. Then I went ahead and attached those hinge plates. Now we're going to go ahead and bore out the holes for the other piece of the hinge onto the doors. Just using the Craig jig. This works really well. And we'll fit those in and attach those with screws. Then we'll attach those to the case. Make a few minor adjustments. And then I've gone ahead and attached drilled some holes in the drawer box, and we'll attach the drawer front. I've just used some double-sided tape to stick that to there, and then some clamps to hold it, and we'll screw that on from the inside. Now this is another glue up that I did for the adjustable shelves, and I'm just cutting those to the proper size. And then I'm going to attach this front piece with glue and biscuits just to add a little bit of strength to the shelf. And then we'll lay that up in the clamps and let that glue cure. And now I'm working on some more trim to go around the top, underneath the top of around the case. I'm just running that profile down both sides of the board. I'm using the multi-profile bit to cut that. And then over to the table saw to trim those, and to the miter saw to cut the 45s. And we'll fit those around the underside of the top on the case. And with a little glue and some more pin nails, we'll attach those to the case. And again, I'm keeping the glue off the top, just gluing those to the case, making sure I got plenty of glue on the miter. We don't want that miter to come apart. Alright, so here I'm building another box, and I have decided to build a semi-secret compartment in this. It won't be completely visible, but it's not completely hidden either. So this will be set inside the top of the cabinet, and I went ahead and used box joints to assemble this box here that you see me making. And this is where it's going to fit in the case, right up in that top web frame that we made. And so I'm adding this piece of trim. This will just give me a place to attach the hinges that I'm going to use. I'm going to use concealed hinges like we did with the doors. And this is the top, or should I say the bottom of the compartment. Using the Craig jig to install the hinges. And there I've gone ahead and fit those hinges. I'll attach them to the frame first. This is the door of the compartment, again the bottom, and I'm routing a 1/4 inch dado along the inside, and I'm going to put some sides to this compartment in there. That will actually fold down with the door to help hold whatever is in there. And this will be the front piece, and that notch is cut out for the closure mechanism that I have. And then I'm going to go ahead and use threaded inserts and install those into the top. I want to make this top removable, so I went ahead and did those, and just routing a profile around the edge of the top. Then I've gone to route the underside with a smaller radius. I believe this was a 1/4 inch radius on the bottom and a 1/2 inch radius on the top. And so with everything completed, we'll go ahead and start to finish. And I'm using the Natura 1 coat. And again, probably as most people do, especially with furniture, I will actually let this sit for a day and then apply a second coat. Seems to just look a little better. And here's some finished shots. And here's that hidden compartment that we just finished. So that's it. Thanks for joining me on this build. I hope you enjoyed your time here. If you liked it, go ahead and give me a like if you think I've earned it. If you want to subscribe to my channel, that would be great too. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I'd love to hear those. Try to answer back as many of those as I can. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.